as we welcome our next speaker, Sashi Rekha, who will be sharing her insights on ensuring data privacy and security when using AI in documentation. She is a technical writer with 9 years of experience, having worked in both startups and multinational firms. With a background in computer science engineering, she has transitioned into technical writing and has contributed to product documentation, videos, white papers, data sheets, and more. Currently, she is at Broadcom, bringing the technical expertise and writing skills to create clear, user-focused documentation. Let's welcome Sashi Rekha. Over to you, Sashi.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, like she just said, I'm Sashi. I'm working with Broadcom as a senior technical writer. So, before I begin, I just want to ask, so how many of you are using any AI tools for documentation? Maybe not. So, I'm pretty sure at least somebody, all of us must be using ChatGPT, right? Just giving out, hey, can you just make this sentence better? Can you just give me a better output? So today we'll be discussing about how we can safeguard our data and security and secure our documentation when we are using AI. So before starting, I want to start off with a couple of examples, a couple of data breaches to be precise. The first one is the Anthem data breach. This has been one of the biggest data breaches in industry. So this was related to the healthcare industry where almost 80 million records were leaked. That included social security numbers, the patient records, the medical records, and everything. So this could have been easily avoided if they could have just encrypted the data and anonymized the data without giving out the names. So this was one of the biggest ones. And the second one is, this is related to fintech. As we are all aware, post-pandemic and during pandemic, the financial sector has become computerized mostly. We hardly go to the bank anymore. So this is one such example where all the customer data, so that included the credit card numbers, the account details, the bank details, everything was leaked, and this was traced back to poor documentation standards because they didn't have any workflows in place. And this could have been easily avoided because the APIs were exposed, the customer data came out. So this is another example. And so we will be talking about different tools, the key risks that we face in documentation while we are documenting, and the problem solutions, and what we as writers can do to ensure privacy compliance documentation. So, I'm pretty sure all of us are using documentation tools, but we also, I know a lot of people who are in startups, we just use MS Office. We do a Word document and convert it into PDF, so that is one. But apart from that, in tools, I'm just going to talk about a couple of tools today which are, at least they were relatively new to me. I have not used them. And the first one is Kalido. This is a tool that, now all the tools I'm talking about are data compliant, and all of them we can have security guidelines integrated into the documentation workflow, so it's easy for us to come up with specific documentation standards that are automated, so we don't have to go ahead and do regular security audits. So Kalido is one, and DocuGammy is another tool. This is again specific to document engineering, where you can give in rough data, it will give you format, it will give out the outputs in data formats, and you can also have reusable data. And the third one is Adobe Sensi. So this one, along with being a documentation tool, it's also a knowledge management system. So you can use it both as a SaaS-based service and an on-prem service where you can download the product and use it on your system without having any data stored on the cloud. So such tools are mostly preferred in industries like security-related industries or fintech industries, where they don't want their information out on the cloud because we all know cloud is not as safe as on-prem servers that we have. So yeah, these are some of the key mechanics. that we will be talking about today. So what we can do in documentation to avoid anything is, first we have to encrypt the data, and this can be done in multiple ways. One of the most famous and industry standards is the AES. It's called the Advanced Encryption Standard 256-bit. So it also comes up in two other formats. There's a 128-bit and a 192-bit. So 256-bit is being used by different national governments as well, by the US government, even recently, even by the Indian government. So with the 256-bit encryption, it gets little more difficult for the hackers to really break into the data and get the information. And ensure we are not retaining any user data and user credentials whenever we are using the customer information. So for this, an example is most of our documentation is hosted online, and for that the users are supposed to log in with the username and password, and only then can they access documentation. So it's a good practice to not store the user information and have on-premise deployment options. So this one, again, on-premise deployment options can be both for the tools that we're using to write and also for the products that we're testing. I'm pretty sure we all test the products before coming up with documentation, because it gives us an idea of how the product works. So it's always good to download the product if we can, if it's not entirely SaaS-based, download it, use it to test it, and then delete all the data in it, so that way the data is secure. And have role-based access control. This again, so an example of this is, sometimes we have certain features we only give out to a couple of customers, not the entire customer base, or it doesn't go as a GA. So at that time we can have role-based access where only a set of people or set of customers have access to the documentation or to the data that we are putting out. And for data anonymization, so this one, I'll just give an example where I'm pretty sure all of us work with the marketing teams for either white papers or data sheets. So say we have a customer who was able to reduce the deployment time from 30 days to just a day because the product has been very helpful for them. And we don't have the permission to use the names, take the customer names. So what we can do is, so say the customer is Coca-Cola or Pepsi, we can just say, a famous beverage brand was able to leverage the product. So this is an example. Ensure we anonymize the data while we're documenting it. And for privacy compliance, these are some of the things we can follow. One is there are multiple privacy standards in the industry. So the examples are shown here, and we can choose any ones that we want based on the industry and based on the geographical location of us and the customers. And ensure we are securing the APIs. So for that, for securing APIs, it's the best combination is a combination of HTTPS and TLS. So that way, when the APIs are on the move, none of the data can be hacked or it can come out. And ensure there's user transparency and the users are in control of the data. So if they want, they can just ask the customer to delete the data, or they can ask us not to sell it to a third party. And have regular security audits. And by this I mean, so most of us don't really use a lot of screenshots in documentation, maybe for localization purposes or whatever. But the very few times we use, we have to ensure the URLs are not exposed, the usernames and passwords are not exposed. Sometimes if we just get a screenshot from the engineering team, we might have just put it in without having a look at it. So with regular security audits, we can remove such screenshots or just mask the data before posting it. And have sandbox environments for testing, have separate environments for testing. Don't just go test it in the environment that it's hosted on. And now what we can do as a technical writer. So as technical writers, we bridge the gap between the engineering team, the privacy policies that we're supposed to adhere to, and the customer. So we can't really give out a 100-page document like ChatGPT gives in different paragraphs saying these are all the things that we're following. So we can convert them into actions and make sure the data is masked, and have checkboxes and terms and conditions and things in place so the reader can go through it and then consent to their data being used by us. And have a privacy first content design. So this can be done by coming up with set guidelines and having specific templates and workflows in place, so that way we know certain data is not supposed to go in and we are sure that it's not going to go in, because it will just give out an error when something like that is written. And so this one, when we have an AI tool as a plugin, we have to ensure we are training it properly and that we are not really feeding any information that's not supposed to go in. And I think a very good example of a well-trained AI is maybe all our delivery apps like Swiggy and Zomato, where they keep giving us prompts every once in a while saying, I'm sure you're in the mood for an ice cream or you're in the mood for your favorite thing. So we can't be doing that in our workplace, so ensure we are training our AI plugins properly. And lastly, this one, if we don't have a plugin in place and we are still going to go ahead and use any of the open source tools for making the documentation better, ensure that the data that we're giving in is already published and it's out there and it's not something new that we are working on. That way we can, so that's a best practice. So that way it's easy for validation and making sure that there is no security breaches that happen. So now we'll be talking about certain international standards. There are many. I'm just covering a few right now. So these are, one is by the EU, the GDPR, and CCPA is by the US government. But both of them have a couple of things in common. It's called right to know, right to access, right to delete, and right to opt out. So as an end user, they have the right to know what personal data is being collected, and they can request access to the data that they have given us, and they can ask for the data to be deleted, and they can also know if the data is being sold, or they should have an option where they can opt out of the data being sold to any third party. And for this in documentation, we have to ensure we are stating all of this clearly when we are giving them the documentation and the terms and conditions that we are writing. And the ISO 27001 and the second one, the 27701, is a subpart of the first one. And these are relatively new. They have come out in I think 2019. So these are specific to information security system. The first one is for information security, and the second one is exclusively for privacy and data privacy management. So that includes the usernames, passwords, and the customer information. And the first one is for the entire information, whatever that's being put out. And for all of these, though we can follow the guidelines, it is advisable for the companies to be certified by ISO in these certifications. And, so this 24028 is again fairly new. I think this has come up in 2022, and this is specifically, it's an AI tool related ISO standard, where they have specific guidelines on what data can be stored by the AI, and what outputs it can be giving out, and how secure it is, and just ensuring that the data is not being misused. And have good cybersecurity frameworks in place. This one, cybersecurity frameworks, is again not much as a writer that we can do, but it's just a good practice to have them in place, and we follow the data encryption standards. So I just want to end it with another example. So this one has happened in one of the biggest casinos in Las Vegas, where everything was connected to the internet, including the fish tank's temperature system. So the hackers got in through the fish tank's temperature system through the Wi-Fi networks, and then they got to the customer base, and then they held them hostage for like a ransom for $10 million or something. So that way, it's always a good practice to have cybersecurity framework so everything is secure. And so this is what we covered. So ensure that we are encrypting the data, make sure we are compliant to certain security guidelines. If we are not certified, we can at least take the guidelines and follow them to make sure the data is compliant, and have regular security audits as and when required. That's it from my side. If you have any questions, please.